I'm Matthew Carey, editor of nonfictionfilm.com, and your host today for Half Hour with 76 Days. With us today is director Hao Wu. Welcome.
Thank you, Matt.
Great to have you with us. Hao is the director of the 2018 film People's Republic of Desire, which won the Grand Jury Prize at South by Southwest. And 76 Days has already won a number of prizes, including the Audience Award at AFI Fest. So congratulations on that.
Thank you.
And the film takes us at a really ground level, visceral view of what happened in Wuhan, China, as the COVID-19 pandemic broke out. And it's really a searing look at conditions in hospitals there. And we'll get a sense of that as we look at this clip now from 76 Days. So we'll show that now, and then we'll dive right into the conversation afterwards. Let's take a look.
我收了17个病人，外面站了36个病人，已经超过50个人了。那外面打架怎么办？
放吗
3个男的，你先不要敲门，我要开门了。
不要敲，敲门就不开了。不要多人。
这个门会把人找到的。
不要他们，听见了？不要他们。什么男的？3个男的。
哎，是，3个男的，一个来。
不要拉门，后面扔。
后面不要拉门。
让我进去。大家要不然都不进。要不然进去来。
我们现在都能收。大家小朋友进来了，大家请配合。我们所有人都已经待了1整天了，没有吃晚饭，请你们配合。不配合现在谁都不许走。
It's really a remarkable scene, and very much gives a sense of the picture that emerges in your film. It's really wonderful example of cinema verite. But first, maybe you could explain the title, because that's really central to what your subject matter was.
Yes, absolutely. So Wuhan was put under official lockdown starting on January 23rd, 2020, and that lasted 76 days. So at that time, when in China, including most people in China at that time didn't know how long the lockdown will last, but somehow, miraculously, the outbreak was put under control fairly quickly, and then the city reopened after 76 days.
Right. And you were based in New York, but you were in Shanghai, really, as this was unfolding. So explain where you were and what it felt like as this emergency was unfolding.
Yeah, so I flew back to Shanghai to spend Chinese New Year with my parents and my sister's family. We had made the trip a couple months in advance. 24 hours before my departure from New York, we heard about this lockdown in Wuhan. In early January, I think on Chinese social media, there was many people were talking about this mysterious pneumonia that's erupting in Wuhan, but nobody took it very seriously because the official media in China were not talking about it. But all of a sudden, it seems like, wow, this is so drastic. In the end, we canceled the trip for my partner, our 2 kids. I flew back by myself. And just spending Chinese New Year, China's largest family holiday, in Shanghai, China's largest city of 21 million, was a very eerie experience because it was the first time I was in an environment where there was nobody on the street, no cars, and people were just so scared. They even though Shanghai was pretty far away from Wuhan, as soon as Wuhan was put under official lockdown, the rest of China went into voluntary shutdown as well. So yeah, it was a pretty confusing time, and also it just got me thinking about I need to do something. Maybe I should make a film about this.
Right, and you were such remarkable circumstances that you were in. You returned to New York, and so you really directed this by remote. Explain how you found collaborators to work with who could shoot in the hospitals in Wuhan.
As soon as I started researching this, when I returned to New York in early February, what I did was reaching out to investigative reporters as well as filmmakers who has started like doing, doing reporting and filmmaking in Wuhan on the ground. So I talked to over a dozen of them, filmmakers, and some of the filmmakers were filming inside the hospital, obviously. Others were filming outside the hospital, following volunteers or even families who were pretty much barred inside because the sort of like the restriction on physical movement was getting tighter and tighter in the city. But as soon as I saw the footage from my two co-directors, by the way, my two co-directors, they didn't know each other. They hadn't known each other, and they were filming independently at four different hospitals. But as soon as I saw their footage, I was immediately like shocked and awed because I feel like their footage had given me such immediacy that took me right to the center of action to experience what the COVID, the response to COVID was like. So that's how I reach out to them and say, let's make a film together.
Yeah, and what are some of the scenes and images that they captured? It's really compelling. See the medical workers certainly, and desperately ill patients, family members who are kind of frantic. And at that stage, of course, nobody knew really how contagious COVID was or the fatality rate from it. So it was a time of great uncertainty and danger.
Yeah, absolutely. As viewers can see from the film, anytime the medical workers went inside what they call a contamination zone, basically where the patients were, and they were put on multiple layers of masks, hazmat suits, and eye goggles, and they actually sealed off any opening that allows air to touch the skin because there was just so much unknown at that time, and. I must say, I have huge respect for my two co-directors because they were doing the same thing every day. They were following the same routine, going in and out of the contamination zone every day. And for them, there were both physical as well as mental challenges. The physical challenges being that wearing those multiple layers of PPEs, it was really, you get tired easily because your body lacked oxygen. It was not very breathable. But more so mentally, for them to film, to really witness patients deteriorate right in front of our eyes, and some of them actually passed away. So it was, they feel a lot of time, pretty helpless. So a lot of time I have to really encourage them to continue on because they are capturing history in the making.
And how did you get the footage that they shot?
So they couldn't take their equipment with them because anytime they take anything out, it had to be thoroughly, disinfected with alcohol or thrown away. So they took their disc out every night, and then they will go back to their hotel where they were quarantined, and to upload the footage onto a Chinese cloud service as backup. And then since they shared their login with me, so I could download the footage remotely in New York. That's probably the only way we could have possibly share footage because any physical shipment of goods was severely restricted and delayed when Wuhan was put under lockdown. And but because the Great Firewall of China, so the speed was always limited. So I will always be a few days behind in terms of reviewing the rushes and have discussion with them.
Right, and I read that you actually considered trying to smuggle yourself into Wuhan at one point, which sounds like that would have been difficult under any circumstances. But
yeah, so I did make very detailed plan and bought the tickets actually to fly back to Shanghai, and we had multiple contingency plans, and one plan is to take the train. The train would still stop at the Wuhan station, but the doors would not open. So my first plan was to beg the conductor to open the door because I had a letter that's certifying I was there doing some reporting work. And if that fails, some volunteers in China has arranged for me to be shipped in to the border of Wuhan on the supply truck. So there were a lot of donated goods still being shipped to Wuhan. So only those trucks were allowed to go inside. So I will be on the back of the truck and, and be shipped in that way. We made all those detailed plans, but then we canceled in early March, because by that time it was very obvious it was coming to the US. And the beginning of this project, for a long time, we were not sure whether we wanted the film to focus on Wuhan only, or do we really want to do like adopt a more global approach. Since I was in New York, I thought at that time, maybe I should just stay in New York and film what's happening here and contrast and compare the Wuhan and New York's experiences.
Right, and I think one of the fascinating things about the film is, well, any documentary is difficult to make, I think. You really encountered major problems because your collaborators stopped collaborating with you at one point. Explain what happened there.
Yes, so starting, I think in March, because the Trump administration was being accused of completely failing the COVID response in the early days. So it started really aggressively blame everything on China. It's not to say China made a lot of mistakes, especially the initial cover-up, right? But then the president really started just talking almost exclusively about this being a China virus, this being a Wuhan virus or Kung flu, and put the entire blame on Chinese government. So the Chinese government in turn became extremely protective and aggressively defensive. It started tightly control any reporting and any narrative around COVID in China. So my two directors at that time, they grew a lot more careful than before. They were kind of also becoming more suspicious of my own motives, because we never met before. We never collaborated. I just reached out to them, introduced by some people we know in common. They were like, we shot this footage because we were there. We saw all these very emotional and moving human elements, human stories. Where do you want to take the film? So they wouldn't trust me, since I'm obviously in New York. I'm also an independent filmmaker. And so in the end, I had to essentially edit out entire rough cut and send it over to them to say, look, this is where I respect how you approach the production, the cinematography. I respect how you approach your subjects. So I want to value that. And this is the story I wanted to tell. So only after they watched the rough cut did they, fully come back and agree to collaborate again.
Wow, those some remarkable obstacles that you had to overcome. And one of the distinctive things about the film is that it is this very ground level, visceral experience of what's going on, and the politics of COVID really remain outside the frame, with one possible exception. We hear over loudspeakers in Wuhan an announcement about do not believe, do not create rumors, and don't spread them, which has an interesting echo in the United States. But why did you decide to really leave the political dimensions outside of the film?
As documentary filmmakers, I always say we are limited by, obviously any film we make, I think is heavily influenced by two factors. One is our own creative intention. The second one is the footage or the character we have access to. So after seeing all footage from everywhere, what I came to realize was what's truly unique was this very humanistic look at what's happening inside the hospitals in the footage coming from my two co-directors. So in many ways, I wanted to preserve that. I wanted to preserve the observational, on one hand, is very almost journalistically observational, because you see absolutely everything that's horrible about inside of a COVID hospital. And at the same time, it's extremely empathetic look and the character. So I want to preserve that. I want to preserve the artistic integrity and creative integrity of my co-directors. And at the same time, I think as the longer I work on this film, the longer I observe how other governments handle the COVID response, how all the society were in some ways ill prepared to deal with this,
Mm.
and also realizing we're still in the midst of the pandemic. It's too early, I think, to draw any conclusion about whether this is right or that is wrong, because, for example, even like most recently, right, a lot of the East Asian countries, we thought they were doing it quite well, like in Japan and South Korea. Right now, they're on the verge of another outbreak there as well. So I just feel like let's perhaps, because based on my observations, all the story, all the different countries and societies almost feel like the same story being played over and over again. So gradually my creative intention also changed into, instead of highlighting what's unique about happened in Wuhan and the social political context of the stories there, maybe I can use the Wuhan story to highlight something that's more universal that people anywhere can connect to.
Well, I think one of the universal aspects, or one hopes it's a universal aspect, is the extraordinary compassion shown by the medical workers, which is just deeply touching. One of them says that one of the patients is so ill that, your family cannot be here, so we're your family now. And it's just so remarkable to see that. And you dedicated the film to medical workers around the world dealing with this. What perhaps touched you most in all the scenes that were shot there for your film?
In early stages of editing, I was crying almost every day, just because every single scene in that film, just the footage was so powerful, the story is so moving. But the image you mentioned just now was actually my favorite image or favorite scene in that film, because my own grandpa was diagnosed with late-stage liver cancer in early February, soon after Chinese New Year. And he passed away really, really quickly, a month later. Because we didn't know that his condition would deteriorate so fast, and also because of travel restrictions, severe travel restriction between US and China by then, I wasn't able even to go back and say goodbye to him. So going into editing of this film, I definitely had a lot of maybe guilt and also sadness, thinking about everything that's been lost, even though my grandpa didn't die of COVID, even though he died with some relatives around him. But the process of getting him inside a hospital to even get a hospital bed was such a difficult, harrowing experience for my family. And then I think I thought about everything that's been lost because of this outbreak. So I don't know, I just feel like in them, when I saw that image, when that nurse reached out, held the old lady's hand, say, "You don't have any family here. Where are your family?" That just broke my heart. That just feel like that's something I needed at that time. I'm pretty sure that's what my grandfather needed and eventually got inside of the hospital as well. So I feel details like that throughout 76 days. It's preserving those little details. Yes, it was my way of paying tribute to the health workers.
One of the scenes that really moved me so much, it's sort of a recurring thing, we see glimpses of it throughout the film, are the ICU nurse who was cleaning the cell phones of patients who did not survive and wanting then to return them to the families at some point. And then on the screen of one of them, we see, 31 unread messages. It's just so poignant. And at one point she says, I have the quote here, "Rich or poor, revered or despised, fate befalls all. What a tragedy nobody can escape." It's such a powerful statement, like a piece of poetry. We have these touches throughout the film that really bring home the humanity, really, of
Yeah, and also the immensity of the tragedy, right? Because I just feel like a lot of time when we talk about COVID, it's too much about statistics, too much about politics. But then faced with a virus, it's a challenge. It's a battle that the entire humanity has to face.
Right. And if someone hasn't had a chance to see 76 Days yet, what is one thing that will make them drop everything and watch right away?
You tell me. I think I've been thinking about this because it is, as a lot of people say, because we're still living through COVID. Why do we need to watch a film? about COVID-19? I guess my answer would be, you think you know COVID-19, but you actually don't, not until you watch this film. Like I mentioned earlier, I just feel like right now we become desensitized by the numbers. We become desensitized or getting somewhat tired of the political fights over whether COVID-19 is real, whether mask mandate is warranted. I really do hope that for anyone who knows someone who refuses to believe COVID-19 is real, just like make sure that person watches this film, because in this film, you stare straight into the face of COVID-19 and you saw how horrible it is and how much destruction it can bring to individuals and families. At the same time, I think as we live through the phase where almost like right now, in the US, we're clinging to the salvation from the vaccines. We're losing hope in many ways from battle, from just in terms of battling COVID-19. But I feel like this film, at least my intention or my understanding from working on this film, is that we're still capable of immense kindness towards each other. We're capable of helping each other to live through this crisis together. So I guess in some ways, I want to also bring hope to those people who feel hopeless.
And I think certainly one of the things that I find fascinating about the film is just cultural differences between the US and China, or things that just struck me as, perhaps I could put it as distinctly Chinese. One of them being that the healthcare workers will address kind of the elders as grandpa or grandma or auntie. And, it's really touching that it says something, I think, about the nature of how people relate to each other, perhaps in China.
Yeah, in some way it does. And also, I also feel like that also speaks to, those terms are absolutely the endearments, right? We use commonly to refer to, especially the elders in Chinese society. But in that environment, inside the hospitals, using of these terms, I think more speak to the immense sense of community that people have when they are trying to, sort of like fight back COVID-19 together.
Right, and that sense of solidarity and perhaps a collective spirit is also perhaps contrasts with the United States, where there's more emphasis on the individual, and a lot of people that we've observed of, well, I'm not wearing a mask, it's my right not to.
Yeah.
This is a very different kind of frame of reference that we see in your film.
Absolutely, I think, and we can. There definitely need to be investigations or discussions about how China mishandled the early response. But I think one thing that's good is that the government mobilized the entire society to really use a very kind of cliche term, to treat this pandemic as a war, right? So the entire society has been mobilized to work in solidarity to beat this back. I think, yeah, absolutely. In the US here, we don't have that kind of sense of urgency. I mean, we had that in the past. We had that in World War I, World War II, when the entire society united behind a single goal. But this time, we, unfortunately, we never had that. And also, lack of leadership from the very, very top, right? In terms of setting examples, setting up the tone, setting up the, guidelines on how we should respond to this together.
Oh, it's really been a fascinating discussion. Thank you so much, Hao Wu. And thank you to our friends at MTV Documentary Films. Hao, again, for speaking with us today. Thank you.
Thank you, Matt. It's been a great pleasure.
All of you who are listening out there to our panel, whether you're on your couch or in the kitchen and wherever you may be, thank you as well for watching.